97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles and NFL Insider John McMullen right here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN on a wow, what a what a wild move that was when it was announced last night. We'll start with Odell Beckham Jr. Traded from the Giants to the Browns for the 17th pick in the draft, a third-round pick, and safety Jabril Peppers here. I mean, I get it. Gettleman finally just said, look, enough's enough. We can't take it anymore. So I don't bash him for that at all. If you have a guy that you just don't think is good for your environment, you're better off without him. But how did it get to this point where Gettleman makes this decision the day before free agency opens?
Well, honestly, the part of it that people don't talk about is when you have GMs and we all kind of look at their moves and judge them on them, and that's really all you can do. But sometimes ownership gets involved, and I think this was an ownership decision. And I think ownership told them to move them and do the best they could because they didn't want to deal with it.
Wasn't it ownership essentially, that told Gettleman he couldn't trade him last year?
Yes. But when you're in charge, you can change your mind. And if you remember, John Mara at one point said he's got to stop this as far as creating the controversy. He's got to worry about on-field, stop doing some of the other stuff and stop being a pain in the you-know-what. Things can change. Just because you feel one way one day doesn't mean you're going to feel that same way a couple of weeks down the road. And as I said, generally when you move a player like that who is not the face of the franchise, because I don't think you can be when you're a wide receiver, and you also have Eli Manning and Saquon Barkley. But he was a big part of the Giants and their face. And that's something you got to run by ownership if you're going to make a trade like that. In this particular case, it was the opposite, though. The ownership went to Dave Gettleman and said, look, we're done. We want to move in a different direction. And then at that point, as the general manager, you just got to do what the best you can as far as getting assets back. And the clearest indication of that, and these are things I've heard behind the scenes, but the clearest indication of that is the dead money, because you're not typically going to accept that much dead money unless you get the go-ahead from somebody pretty important in the organization. And it doesn't get more important than the owners.
$16 million in dead money, right?
I think it's more than that. I don't have it in front of me, but I think it was over 20.
Whoa.
But nonetheless, it's a really big number as far as dead money goes. And then the second part is also, and I bring up John Gruden, and I brought up this example on Twitter because people react in the immediacy, and I get it. But as I always point to, Gruden and the Raiders were a laughing stock when they got rid of Khalil Mack, and he played so well in Chicago. And then they got rid of Amari Cooper, and he played so well in Dallas. Well, all of a sudden you fast forward, and they have Antonio Brown. They have 3 first-round picks. They have a top-5 pick where they're going to get an edge rusher on a rookie deal instead of $25 million. Now, this may not work for the Raiders, but it's not nearly as bad as it once looked. Mm-hmm. And I think ultimately for the New York Giants, and this is also what I put out, imagine this scenario, Mike. The Arizona Cardinals want to draft Kyler Murray. They trade Josh Rosen to the New York Giants for a third-round pick. The Giants take an edge rusher at 6. They get an offensive lineman at 17. Does that trade look as bad as it looks today?
I don't think the trade looks all that bad. Like, if you feel you have a toxic person on your roster and you feel it's going to be less toxic, I think that you wrote about how chemistry sometimes is just as important as talent, right? You wrote about it yesterday.
Well, sure, yeah.
It's totally valid.
Well, I'm talking from a talent standpoint. You generally, if you're going to trade players like Odell Beckham, and Antonio Brown for that matter as well, you're not going to get back the same type of talent. It doesn't work that way. And there are other issues at play. We all know what they were with Antonio Brown because he couldn't stop going on social media and trying to get himself out of Pittsburgh. It's not as overt, at least recently, with Odell, but you've seen some of the issues in the past that the Giants have not liked. And you're right. You're 100% right. But from just a pure talent standpoint, you're not going to get back what you had with that player. And I'll give Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated credit for this. He ran down the last 10 Super Bowl winners and the best receiver on those particular teams. There's no Odell Beckhams on there.
No, I mean, the record
you can
in New
win.
York, the record in New York doesn't add up to the distractions.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's why personally, I have no problem with what Dave Gettleman did. I have no problem with the Giants did. In fact, I think it's a positive because they have finally highlighted. They know they have to rebuild. They know they have to move on from Eli Manning. And they finally started that.
Well,
and they started that with this trade.
That was going to be my follow-up is, okay, they ripped off one Band-Aid. Does Gettleman have the stones to rip off a second Band-Aid and say, boom, what reason do they have to roll out Eli Manning now this season? None.
Well, yeah, they don't have to. Ultimately, I think they will, whether they draft a quarterback or whether, as I said, say they make a trade for Josh Rosen or somebody of that ilk. I do think Eli has started really, from all practical purposes, he's been a bridge for about 4 years now. You shouldn't have a bridge for 4 years. From the Giants' perspective, they finally realized he is the bridge now to the young guy. And whether that bridge is the preseason, 4 weeks in, 6 weeks in, he's now officially a bridge. They know it, and they're going to go in a different direction. And that's a positive.
Yeah, now, you mentioned before Rosen. I mean, they have 17-6, so they can package that to move up in the draft if they want to draft someone. They might get someone at 6, or they now can be a player for a player like Rosen if they want to make a trade. I figure, to me, look, the wide receiver, Beckham was talented. He was great. He put up great numbers, historic. They didn't do a whole heck of a lot of winning with them. They're going to start building this team, I guess, as a run-centric team around Barkley.
Yeah, well, they have to now. And in the short term, they certainly they don't have a quarterback. They don't have great receivers, and they have a great running back. So, yeah, I mean, Pat Shurmur is a smart guy, and he will build around his best player, and that's clearly Saquon Barkley. But they're not ready to compete. They know they're not ready to compete. And this is more about the long-term future than anything else.
Yeah. I don't have a huge problem with what Gettleman did. People are killing him. I don't have a big problem.
People are killing me for defending him. Never mind him. I can't imagine what he's going through. And I'm not even defending him. I'm just saying it's logical. You're not a contender. Think about this. If Odell Beckham Jr. comes back and Saquon Barkley is there and Eli Manning's your quarterback, you're not contending. You're fooling yourself. They're not going to beat the Cowboys or the Eagles in the NFC.
They're not going to beat the Redskins.
Possibly not beat the Redskins. Never mind go through the NFC. So they're not a contender with them. We talk about this a lot in the NBA. It's different with tear downs and rebuilding and tanking. But it is shifted to the NFL, not as drastically, but that's where the Giants are. This is,
right.
You saw it with the Cleveland Browns.
You can make an argument that Cleveland has now sent the first shot of, hey, look what we did, and now look where we are. Now, a lot of that had to do, they had a lot of assets to trade to make trades like this, and the big thing is, much like the Sixers, they got a lot of picks wrong, but they got one right. Baker Mayfield. The Sixers got one right, Joel Embiid, and that changed everything. Baker Mayfield has changed everything for them.
Yeah, and that happens with any quarterback in this league. If you get the quarterback it doesn't matter. And that's a perfect example because people are, now kind of gotten, and you've seen it in a number of places. I've mentioned it in the past. People have started to make those Sashi Brown, Sam Hinkie comparisons. Obviously, Sashi wasn't around nearly as long. He didn't do it nearly as long, but he collected all the assets, and they were able to ultimately get a quarterback, and now they've started to go in the right direction. They've added a lot of talent to that team, and you're right. People are going to start looking at that and sort of trying to copy it or at least try to copy it as best as possible. On the other hand, you have this team where I'm standing at right now, the Philadelphia Eagles. Part of the reason the Cleveland Browns have all this talent is because of the Carson Wentz trade and everything they were able to spawn off that. But if you talk to the Eagles, they're thrilled. They got Carson Wentz. They already have a Super Bowl, and people say, well, Carson wasn't around for it. I got news for you. This team doesn't win a Super Bowl without Carson Wentz. He was the MVP of this league before he got hurt, and he did the heavy lifting to get him home field advantage. And then to Nick Foles' credit, he finished them all. But if Carson Wentz gets hurt again and never lives up to the hope of what we all think he's going to be, it will have still been worth it for this team because the Lombardi Trophy is in the lobby of the NovaCare complex. And Carson Wentz was a big part of that.
Yeah, by the way, the trade is official. The Eagles have gotten Deshaun Jackson for and a 7th-round pick for a 6th-round pick. The trade is official. The Malik Jackson signing is official. John, you were at the press conference about a half hour ago. Anything stick out from big Malik Jackson jumping to Philadelphia?
Yeah, he was very honest. You don't see that with a lot of players. He admitted he was benched for what the Jaguars described as ineffective run play, run defense, run support. And, look, that was part of it. He didn't have a great year coming off his best year, which was the Pro Bowl season the year before. He's more known as an interior pass rusher. But I think more of the benching had to do with his salary cap number, which would have been $15 million if he stayed in Jacksonville. So once the season started getting away from the Jaguars, they looked at their situation they were in, and they said, well, there's no way we can bring Malik back at $15 million. So they wanted to look at some younger players, and I think that was the bigger issue. But there is no question that he's a pass rusher more than a run defender, and that's going to be interesting because what the Eagles are looking for is a 2-down player inside. And then, in theory, you rotate Brandon Graham inside in the nickel, bring Chris Long in. So we're going to have to wait and see how Malik Jackson holds up in run support.
Yeah, a lot of news today, by the way. Let's hit on some more of the news that is happening. How about Baltimore getting Mark Ingram? And not that I thought that Ingram was going to come to Philly because I still think a running back for them would be nice, but the Ravens making some noise.
Yeah, Earl Thomas as well. I wondered, Baltimore had the best defense in the NFL last year, but they were aging at some key spots, Eric Weddle being one of them. Terrell Suggs as well, who they ultimately lost to Arizona. And Eric Weddle, though, surprised me because he was such a key part of their defense. He's such a smart player. They used him in so many ways, and he kind of wondered, well, why? I get from the age standpoint, but you could have got him, could have restructured at a better number. He didn't take a ton of money when he signed with the Rams. Hey, they got Earl Thomas. So that's a Hall of Fame player. Now, you have to be concerned because he's had 2 leg injuries. But boy, if he can be what he was in that defense, all of a sudden it looks much better. And that's a team that has struggled to find a running back. And Mark Ingram is a good running back. He's not a great running back, but he's a guy who can get you 1,000 yards. He's a guy who can be a really effective as a two-down runner. And if you can find that third down back to complement him, you got something with that offense. And obviously that offense is the most run-centric offense in the NFL because of Lamar Jackson.
Yep, and you mentioned Earl Thomas heading to Baltimore, which means he's not going to Dallas. So Dallas is left out here, and they lost Cole Beasley to Buffalo.
Yeah, they have some cap issues, and they couldn't afford to get in the Earl Thomas range as far as money in that safety market. There's been so many good safeties. Landon Collins getting big money as well. I think they were hopeful because Earl's a Texas guy and he loved the Cowboys growing up, that he would take less money. Sometimes people do that. Brandon Graham here certainly took less money than he would have gotten if he went to free agency. You saw Anthony Barr turn around. He made up his mind he was going to sign with the Jets and then slept on it and said, you know what, I'm more comfortable in Minnesota, and he took less money to go back. So some players do that kind of thing, but more often than not, if the money is significantly different, you leave the children stuff for the children, and it's a business, and you go, who's going to pay you the most and who values you the most.
Le'Veon Bell, I mean, he'll never get that money back. Malpractice. The agent should be sued for malpractice.
Well, I'm not blaming the agent because I think it came from Le'Veon. I think Le'Veon had it in his mind. I talked about it a lot on this show. He wanted to change the whole landscape of the position from a financial perspective. He essentially wanted to create a new position. I said it numerous times. It wasn't going to happen. It didn't happen. He essentially got the same deal he would have gotten, or very near, if he played last season and gotten an extra $14.5 million. A lot of people have said it. A lot of people are making excuses for him. He made a big mistake. He will never make that money back, and there's nothing he can do. You just sort of admit your mistake and move on.
I mean, it feels like the guy just stuck his tail between his legs and said, give me the best thing you can find, and this is it.
And that was it. And that's why I said the Eagles weren't going to get involved. Not that they didn't like him as a player. That would have been another example if he said, look, the market isn't there. I didn't get what I was going to expect to get. I want to go to the best situation. I want to go to a contender. I think the Eagles would have jumped in, tried to cobble together a deal at 11, 12 million, but he was always going to take the most money.
Crazy.
And I don't blame him for that, but unfortunately for him, the most money isn't nearly as much as what he was going to get. There wasn't even a market for his services. It was basically the Jets and nobody else. They tried to spin it like the Ravens were interested because they were in the running back market, but they weren't. And then they tried to spin it like the 49ers were involved. It was a sad situation.
Le'Veon Bell heading to the Jets, and that is happening today. Nick Foles, by the way, he's officially a Jaguar. He has signed down there. Also, Adrian Peterson is back with Washington. He gets a 2-year deal, so he'll be back there. So not a lot of big things happening. I guess next up on the big on the list would be what happens to a guy like Tevin Coleman after the running back market with Bell and Ingram.
Yeah, typically the Eagles, you get that 4 o'clock bomb. I thought maybe we were going to get the Tevin Coleman bomb. We didn't get it.
I promised the listeners by the end of the show he would be an Eagle. It's got to happen now.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, and I still think he might be an Eagle, but I thought they were going to have it ready to go at 4 o'clock. That's obviously not the case. And Ronald Darby, I think, is very, very interesting because his market, the fact that he is still out there surprises me because the cornerback market as a whole is not very good this year. but people obviously looked at the injury history, and maybe his numbers coming down a little bit, and maybe that gets the Eagles more involved.
All right, we'll keep our eyes on that. Man, there's so much else going on here. Well, by the way, so Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham, Chubb, Kareem Hunt, and Jarvis Landry. Is Cleveland your favorite in the AFC North? In the AFC?
Well, not in the AFC. I think on paper they look like they had the most talented roster in the AFC North, and that's pretty amazing. Well, I mentioned the hits. Baltimore took on defense. They got back Earl Thomas, so it's not as bad as it looked at the beginning of the day. Pittsburgh, we know, lost Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell. That's going to be tremendously difficult. Even Jesse James, the tight end, going to be very difficult for them to be what they typically are. And Cincinnati has really fallen back. Yeah, they look like the most talented team in the AFC North, but yeah, they're not going to beat the Patriots. I mean, as long
haven't
as
done a thing.
Well, I joked on some other shows. I've been joking for a couple of days while everybody is tripping over each other to spend the stupid money. Bill Belichick is in Barbados vacationing. He's back now, obviously, but it is sort of a metaphor for how they do business. I think I said it on this show. I think Trent Brown is the greatest metaphor. What they did with Trent Brown, remember, they traded for him. San Francisco. He's a decent player. It was a slot trade. They moved down in the draft and picked him up. He started at left tackle for him, final year of his rookie deal. Played great. They won a Super Bowl. He got $66 million contract from the Raiders.
Yep.
And Isaiah Wynn, a former first-round pick who was injured last year, is going to step in and play left tackle. And they're not going to miss a beat.
They would start Jordan Mailata and not have a problem.
I don't know about that, but they always have a plan. And look, I think the Eagles are in the conversation for being the second smartest team in the NFL. I think you could put them in that conversation. And they've made a lot of great second-tier signings over the past couple of years. Chris Long, Patrick Robinson, LeGarrette Blount, players like that. This second tier, as you'll see, begin to start, that's when the smart money is spent, and you get the deals, and you get the bargains. And if you make the right decisions, you can put yourself over the top.
Plenty more on the NFL. Of course, tomorrow we'll have the latest on NFL free agency. We'll see if Tevin Coleman is an Eagle. I'm holding out hope by the end of the show that something gets done. We shall see. At JF McMullen, the Eagles bring in Malik Jackson. The trade with Deshaun Jackson, that is official. And Nick Foles, he is officially a Jaguar. John?
Yeah, and Deshaun will be here tomorrow, so he'll talk to us tomorrow.
Ooh, good.
I don't know if they're going to have a jackpot records backdrop instead of the Eagles draft.
Is he going to wrestle away number back. 10 from Mac Hollins?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to have a problem with that. Mac Hollins was here on his bike, and I don't think they've discussed it yet. But if Deshaun wants 10, he's getting 10. Let's put it that way.
John McMullen at JF McMullen on the Eagles in the NFL right here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, pal.
Thanks, Mike.